Psalm 27, verses 1 and then verses 4 through 9. Psalm of, presumably David wrote this psalm. The Lord is my light and my salvation, so why should I be afraid? The Lord is my fortress, protecting me from danger, so why should I tremble? The one thing I ask of the Lord, the one thing I seek most, is to live in the house of the Lord all the days of my life, delighting in the Lord's perfections and meditating in his temple. For he will conceal me there when trouble comes. He will hide me in his sanctuary. He will place me out of reach on a high rock, and then I will hold my head high above my enemies who surround me. At his sanctuary I will offer sacrifices with shouts of joy, singing and praising the Lord with music. Hear me as I pray, Lord. Be merciful and answer me. My heart has heard you say, come and talk with me. My heart responds, Lord, I am coming. Do not turn your back on me. Do not reject your servant in anger. You have always been my helper. Do not leave me now. Don't abandon me, O God, my salvation. Foxhole Faith. Story about a Civil War situation. There was a Presbyterian minister named Robert Louis Dabney. Robert Louis Dabney, you've never heard of him, I'm sure. He was a minister back in the Civil War days, and he was a major in the Army of Northern Virginia. He was a personal friend of General Stonewall Jackson and served as chaplain to his troops. Well, when he preached to Jackson's soldiers, he always talked about predestination. Predestination. He assured them if they were predestined to die in battle, then there would be nothing that they could do to avoid one of those Yankee mini balls coming out of those guns from the Union forces. Nothing they could do to do anything about it if they were predestined to die. But if they were predestined to live, then there was nothing the Yankees could do to kill them either. So either way, it is what it is. Therefore, he said, you should all be brave in the heat of battle. No matter what is going on, you can be brave and confident that whatever is going to happen is what's going to happen, and God has it happening that way. But one day, this is what happened. Major Dabney, he was visiting the front lines, and a skirmish erupted between the gray and the blue. And the Yankee mini balls came kicking up dust and coming all around him and raining around him, and he was in some major trouble. The major was, and what did he do? He ran as fast as he could for a big old oak tree, and he jumped behind the tree and he landed on top of a Confederate private who already had taken refuge there. And the private was very quick to remark when he saw this. He says, "Major Dabney, you don't practice what you preach." "What do you mean?" Dabney asked. "Well," the private continued, "you're always telling us that everything that's going to happen has already been planned and predestined by the Almighty God, and we can't escape our predestined fate. So for this reason, we should be calm in battle. But when the bullets started flying, you forgot about this, and you resorted to free will, trying to save yourself by running and jumping behind this tree. What's up with that?" Well, Major Dabney was a little bit flustered for a moment's time there, but then he quickly thought about what he was going to say, and he explained the more subtle differences to the young man. He said, "You see, son, you have overlooked two important facts. Number one, the tree was predestined to be here. And number two, I was predestined to run and jump behind it. Therefore, God was in control of it all after all." So he was rationalizing his own fear and jumping behind the tree. It's a humorous story describing the idea that many have put forth in our Christian faith. The idea that you are immortal until God takes you by the hand and leads you home. It's an interesting way to look at life, is that you are immortal until God brings you home. Whenever that might be and why ever that might be, until God takes you by the hand. "Precious Lord, take my hand, lead me on to the promised land, the old song that goes like that. But until that day happens, you are in essence immortal. You can live your lives with your head held up high and with confidence, knowing that God's promise to you is always secure and you cannot die until that day, whenever that day might be. And that's what Major Dabney, he had full confidence that God placed that tree there. I think it's a little silly. And that the tree was God's hand of protection on his life, warding off death before its rightful time. And so that major confidently declared that one can have extraordinary bravery in the face of terror, because whether you're dodging mini balls or simply tucked warmly in bed in your own home, in either scenario, death is only as close as he would say, predestined to be, or as I would say, when that time is going to come. So why, the question then becomes, if this is the case, if your days are as they are and you're immortal till God calls you home, why jump into foxholes at all? Why jump out of the way? Why jump into safety and security? Or why jump behind trees, for that matter? The major could have just stood out there and said, well, my time is in God's hands, so I will stand here and watch the balls fly by. Well, obviously, he's human like we are, and we find ourselves getting afraid and jumping into places that we think are safe and secure, even though it really won't change the inevitable, will it? It really won't. Yet fear drives us to seek shelter and protection from that which makes us afraid. In short, we jump into foxholes when bullets are flying overhead because that's just our natural reaction to do so. You've all heard the expression, there are no what in foxholes. What is there none of in foxholes? Atheists. There are no atheists in foxholes. Quoted by President, someone once said, it wasn't Dwight Eisenhower, but he quoted it in some remarks that he made from the White House back in 1954 as part of an American Legion program. And this saying, this familiar quote, it occasionally means that all soldiers in combat are converted to faith under fire because of the terror of the battlefield brings them to their knees as they face their own mortality. But the expression is not limited to battlefield situations like that. It's actually most often used in other situations. It's most used to express the belief that all people seek some sort of divine power when they're facing an extreme threat. Something is really threatening in our lives. We tend to, at that point in time, get on our knees and say, God, I need you. And those are the moments that we do this. But there's a catch to this. Because when seeking divine power, or when seeking God's deliverance from a situation, one could argue that God's comfort in the foxhole is not meant to keep you in the foxhole. So when we say there are no atheists in foxhole, meaning that those people in extreme, difficult situations and have jumped into a foxhole of life in order to seek God's refuge, what we're saying is that if God gives you comfort, the comfort that God gives us, the reassurance that God gives us when we're in that foxhole, it's meant not to keep us in the foxhole. It's meant to give us the strength to step out and to get out of that place and to get on with it in life. That's what it's for. So to say that there are no atheists in foxholes, well, truthfully speaking, when God gives us strength and courage, He doesn't want us to stay there. He realizes why we're there, but He wants us to get up and get out. Get on with the life that He's called us to live, realizing that our lives are safely in His promise. Always. Psychiatrist Anderson Thompson said this. He said, maybe there are only atheists in foxholes. He said that because if the faithful truly and fully believe in a protective God, why would they dive into a foxhole to protect themselves from the bullets whizzing by? Because they have nothing to fear. Nothing to fear. Maybe it should more accurately be said there are no faithful people in foxholes, because the faithful know that their time is in the same hands as the one who holds all of time. Whenever that time is, it's in God's hands, and we are immortal until God calls us. After all, life cannot really be lived very well in foxholes. Imagine living in there. But also imagine the foxholes that we create in our own lives. How confining are they? Those places that we run to and that we avoid life in, and we all do it. How confining and constricting are they when we're trying to live life and we have taken that ability away from ourselves because we've put ourselves in places where life really can't be lived. In the mortal words of Garth Brooks, life is not tried, it is merely survived when you're standing outside of the fire, or when you're standing away from life, or when you're hiding from the life that's around. When we're not engaged in the life that is around us, then we're just simply trying to survive, and it's not living life, it's just trying to endure it. And I'm sure that if I could ask every one of you personally, would you rather live life to its fullest or just endure it until the end? I'm sure everyone would say, I would rather live. Even if I have 10 days left to live in this world, I would rather live those 10 days than just cower my head and endure it until it's done. So this psalm today is for everyone who finds himself stuck in a foxhole, or anyone who has been in a foxhole in the past, or fears finding themselves in a foxhole in the future. And therefore, oftentimes, and this is the reality of life, if you've been through tough situations, and all of us have, oftentimes that can prevent you from ever putting yourself out there in the future, because you're afraid if you get out there and you step into new places, then you might wind up having that overwhelming feeling again, and again retreat yourself to a foxhole, and therefore you don't want to be there, so that we do nothing. Then we don't live. Then we don't move forward. Well, David said in verse 1, the Lord is my light and my salvation, so why should I be afraid? The Lord is my fortress, protecting me from danger, so why should I tremble? But we do. But we do tremble. But we are afraid. But there is something we can do about it. I mean, if you read through the psalm, David clearly values safety. He doesn't like to be afraid. He's not excited about being afraid and trembling. No one likes that feeling at all. This is something he longs for in his life. If you look at this, he mentions it over twice again in parallelism. He mentions the same thing twice just to emphasize the point. The point is, number one, he is afraid and he is trembling. And the point is, number two, he has no reason to be. Why does he have no reason to be? Because God is his fortress and his protection. God is his light and his salvation. What else does he need? He has everything he needs. And perhaps this is why this psalm reads like a foxhole monologue. A monologue of someone who is actually in a foxhole of life. And it evokes images of evildoers and adversaries and foes and armies and enemies and violence. And David longs for the security and the cover and the protection of God. And he's relying upon God for such protection and assurance. Verse 4. Verse 4, here he is. The one thing I ask of the Lord, the one thing I seek most is to live in the house of the Lord all the days of my life, delighting in the Lord's perfections and meditating in his temple. You know, obviously, David is in some sort of life battle when he was writing this psalm. You know, whether it's actually a military battle or it's within the political ranks or even his own family. I mean, David lived a colorful life. He really did. He was chosen by God to be king at a very young age. But there was a problem. There already was a king. And so David was chosen to be the next king even while that existing king was in place, King Saul. Then David went off and he killed, who did he kill? The big guy. Goliath, right. What a triumphal moment for David when he killed this giant of the Philistines. And he was at an all-time high. But right after that all-time high, Saul, the existing king, got very jealous of this new king in the future coming up to power. And everyone's on his side. And look at the incredible things he's doing. So Saul got jealous, and he sought to kill David. David had to run for his life. Literally run for his life. And he was hiding out in caves and trying to, these are his foxholes, trying to escape death from King Saul. But eventually, of course, God protected him. God protected him all the way through. And it's almost like David looks back and says, why was I afraid? Why was I even afraid of anything? God is my fortress. And I knew that, and I knew it all along. Well, Saul dies, and David became king. And there's a wonderful story in the Bible about David bringing the ark into Jerusalem and all of its glory and all of its celebration. But then the highs are always followed by the lows. David found himself in the midst of adultery with someone named Bathsheba, even ensuring that her husband got killed in battle in order to cover up his horrible mistakes. Now, after that, David's son Absalom rebels against him. Betrays him. David had many times where he found himself in the foxholes of life. He was in a fight for life with his own heart even many times. He was this knockdown drag-out of a war of his own will when he faced the decisions of right and wrong, just like all of us. His heart was fainting for fear, and all of his courage was vanished. He remembered better days when he would visit the house of the Lord and be full of faith. But he found himself in a foxhole. His enemies all around him. He is afraid. And all he wants to do is bury his head. Because that's what we do in foxholes. We cover our heads and close our eyes and wish that it all goes away. But it doesn't. Verse 5. David said, he will conceal me there when troubles come, and he will hide me in his sanctuary. He will place me out of reach on a high rock. You can see David just longing to escape, longing to be anywhere but where he was, facing anything in this world but the things that he was facing. It's like, God, transport me away to some distant land or world where I am safe and sound. Anybody ever felt that way before? God, get me out of here. God, make it go away. Make this change in my life. Just somehow bring me somewhere else. Bring me to my happy place. Who's got a happy place they think about in times of trouble? Oh, come on. We all got happy places we think about. Yeah, happy place. But for David, it wasn't reality. He could wish his life were different. We can all wish our lives were different, right? We can all sit there and wish for different things, like things worked out differently, like maybe we were stronger or more able. Maybe we were treated better. Maybe we wished that we were loved more, hurt less, emotionally battered less. Maybe we have wished that we were protected from the pain that life brings us all. But that's just not how things work. That's not how life goes. In our world and in our lives, battle lines are drawn and attacks come at us. We often dive into foxholes, cover our heads, and hide. What do we fear nowadays? A lot of things, right? I mean, another mass shooting yesterday, right? Down in, Louisiana. I think I saw it this morning, 9 people were killed. It's like, how do we do this? We fear mass shootings. We fear violence. We fear climate change. We fear identity theft. We fear cancer, threats to our children, having enough money to retire or having enough money as we're retired. We fear going to the dentist. Anybody fear that? Yeah, me. Dentist, yeah. Price of gas or heating fuel. Illnesses explode in our lives, and death and loss demolish our spirits. Deceit and betrayal, they bombard us sometimes. feeling that we are alone and abandoned in this world can lay our countenance to waste, sending us into places of hiding and safety. And we ask God for his protection and peace in our hearts, but admittedly, sometimes all we feel is dread and fear, even when we're asking God for help. So we dig a ditch, and we jump into a foxhole. The foxholes have different shapes and sizes for all of us. They really do. The foxhole could be our living room, right? That safe place where we go, and the old familiar place on the couch with the TV remote in our hands. That place where we check out of life over and over rather than going out and living life. We watch it on television. And I hear my kids talking about this all the time. And I hear, when we get together as people, what do we talk about nowadays? Did you see that show? Did you see that movie or that series on Netflix? I mean, do we live life anymore, or all we're doing is watching it on TV? And I'm guilty of the same thing. It's a foxhole. It's an escape. And some escapes are good. I realize you need to escape in this world a little bit, but I feel like oftentimes we are encouraged to live in this foxhole forever because it's safer. And I think that's why so many people fight each other on social media, because it's their foxhole where they feel safe and they can lob emotional grenades out of their social media foxholes, never having to face their enemies in real life, or they can channel their fear and their anger about life to these faceless online contacts where it all seems like a game, all the while never really living in the actual world around us. Foxholes can be in the shape of 12-ounce cans or 750-milliliter bottles. Foxholes can be in the shape of little brown plastic pill containers. Foxholes can be in the shape of little thin white paper sticks that go up in smoke that we rely upon many times, and many people do in our lives. And I'm not against all of this stuff. I think all things in moderation is a great philosophy to handle such things. But when moderation turns into self-induced hibernation, when we are foxholed in our den of avoidance, then we no longer have control over that which we thought we did. It controls us. And when it controls us, it keeps us from living, and it keeps us from life. When we're in foxholes, we are not living life. And it's our choice. We remain in the foxhole of our own creation, hiding from the enemy. But the enemy is so often within. Even our own thoughts and misbeliefs turn back against us by the enemy of our souls, and then we cower. And then we shiver inside. And maybe even with a smile on our face for the world to see. But inside and behind that facade is fear and foreboding, just like David wrote about. We're fearful of all the what-ifs, and as the what-ifs zip over our heads like artillery, we stay right where we are, and we don't move. And that's where we find ourselves. And foxholes feel very comfortable at first. They really do. When you find that escape from whatever is in your life, it can feel very, very comfortable. But then the comfort wears off because it can't last, but we want it to. David doesn't feel comfortable in his foxhole anymore. He felt hemmed in. He's in a tight place and very little wiggle room, and it's uncertain. He's uncertain about his future like us. Verse 7. Hear me as I pray, Lord. Be merciful and answer me. My heart has heard you say, come and talk with me. And my heart responds, Lord, I'm coming. But you almost get the sense that, Lord, I'm coming, but I just can't make it there. I just can't get out of where I am. Lord, I want to come. I hear you calling. Lord, I want to come. And then David says this, almost as if he realizes he can't make it out of this hole. He's like, God, I'm taking a long time. Don't turn your back on me. I'm not feeling as confident as I should be in your protection. But while I'm still in this foxhole, don't abandon me. Don't reject me in anger. You've always been my helper. Don't leave me now. Don't abandon me. God of my salvation. Have you ever been in that foxhole? You know, the God, where are you foxhole? Maybe you're so used to being there that you don't even realize that that's where you are. Reading a story in preparation for the sermon today. It's about a man named Shane. Shane never imagined he would one day find himself sleeping on the streets. Shane grew up in a stable family just north of Atlanta. He was involved with church. He had a steady job. But one day he became disabled, and his life turned upside down. He said that was hard. It was hard as a man, he said, to accept the fact that he can't work with his hands like he did before. Or he can't do as good as he used to be. He felt, as a man, he felt like less of a man. And he felt down and depressed. He said God seemed a million miles away. He was so depressed that he attempted suicide on his life. And one thing led to another, and he found himself in Atlanta with no place to call home, homeless on the streets with so many others. Something he never imagined that he would experience. That became his foxhole. That's where he retreated to. He remembers one night, he spent the night trying to sleep on the steps of a church with everything he owned in a backpack and one duffel bag. And he never imagined he would be one of the people that before he would pass by these people and just ignore them. But yet, here he was in that same foxhole that they found themselves in. He was in the same one. He said, I slept with my arms through my backpack and my head on my duffel bag because I was scared to death that someone was going to steal it. And that's all I had. And that was his life. And he said, even as a big guy like I am, I was still scared someone would come in there and try to take my stuff. But when Shane learned that from a friend that there might be room in the Shepherd's Inn homeless mission shelter in Atlanta, he jumped at the chance. For Shane, this was his chance to jump out of the foxhole. And he did, but you have to understand, if he jumps out of that foxhole, then he has to go back to living life. And that's what scared him the most, is going back to living life when he thought he couldn't. He didn't know how he was going to. So when he had that chance, he had to make a decision. Am I going to stay in this foxhole where I am? Miserable as it is, but yet I feel like it's safer. Or am I going to get up? And am I going to get the help I need? And am I going to get out back into life? He said, before I came down here, if I saw a homeless person, I'd cross the street rather than walk by them. But now, he said, I understand. And he said this, he said, and maybe you thought this too as well, I always thought people didn't want to work and that they were shifty and they just wanted people to give them things, so they became homeless. But a lot of them, he said, it's just people that had one piece of bad luck happen in their lives and then they ended up on the street. But right now, according to the story that I read, he's currently helping out at the homeless mission shelter. He's the receptionist at the front desk. He welcomes new clients coming in. And he's looking forward to returning and reuniting with his sons, getting a place of his own, finding a job he can physically manage. It's all scary to him. But why should he tremble? It's all very frightening to him. But why should he be afraid? So then our question today is, what foxhole do you find yourself in? And do you even realize that you are in that foxhole? Maybe it's been so long. Why should we be afraid? Why should we tremble? Like Shane, it's time to step out into the light of day and to hold our head up high, because God is the lifter of our head. And instead of trembling, we can live life like David. Verse 6, when David said, then I will hold my head high above my enemies who surround me. At his sanctuary I will offer sacrifices with shouts of joy. singing and praising the Lord with music. But in order for David to do that, he had to get out of his foxhole. And he did. And he trusted. And so can we. Could you stand for our